Greetings all. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience. Wow. Okay, so we're just going to get into it, which is stars, astrology, and how we've been taught it. So, of course, it always starts with like one piece of information, and then I start going down a rabbit hole. But it all goes back to the mother, because the more I start recognizing certain ancestors, certain names of stars, certain cultural backgrounds, languages, links to languages and peoples, it all goes back to the stars. It is freaking phenomenal, really, how much goes back to the stars. And recently I heard that there is a Dogon story, and there is, because I looked it up, that there was a time before the moon. Okay? Some people have had those kind of remembrances of it existing as a being in a time before the moon. And then I started thinking about all the stories, and moon stories don't come later into a lot of these ancient stories. Or if the moon is in it, it doesn't quite kind of like pulse in the way that it does, in the way we've been taught. So again, I was like, what? Because in the Dogon story of the time before the moon, their story is that the moon shifted the natural rhythm of the planet. I was like, what? I hope you also have a similar story. And there are several other indigenous groups of ancient that had similar stories. So, what? So I went down that interesting story and found that in that also there's this link to Saturn. And the story is, and this is, we do hear this today, the story is that Saturn somehow is siphoning energy through the moon. Which just was like, oh, come on. Because what? If this is true, okay. So I said, okay, if this is true, what did the Dogon and the Hopi and these groups do about it? Well, this is where dancing, drumming, and singing and all of the teachings around the elementals comes in. Okay, so through that, I went back to the stars. I learned some more about some other stars and learned some things about other constellations and deities. Okay, deities, great mothers. Well, then I, again, because it's just everywhere, myself kind of delved into astrology along with this research around the stories before the moons, because the stories before the moons are the stars. It's stars. And then there's stories after the moon, which is the stars. And where that took me again was, okay, the calendar and astrology. So in decentering men and deconstructing colonialism and patriarchy, besides education, it's astrology. It is so patriarchal. I cannot believe it. Because we look at the Gregorian calendar, which is it's like a move on the Julian calendar, which is 14 days, 13 days behind us in this year. And then we have other calendars that have completely different dates. Okay. Guess what they're based on? Predominantly the stars. Okay. Because. So something that came up was Sumerians. And, I was like, when did astrology first become a thing? And it said the Sumerians and the Babylonians in 500 BE. And I was like, no, because They have all kinds of star stories and all kinds of like goddess stories and stuff. They didn't have 12-month astrology, and they didn't. They had 18 constellations that they followed by the moon. I think it's the Babylonians and Sumerians. Let me double check that. Yes. They originally used 18 constellations along the path of the moon, the lunar zodiac, or the path of the moon, the Mul Apen. And there's some text around this. The Mul Apen, which means, I can't remember, moon line, I think. Path of the moon. Mul Apen means path of the moon. There you go. Well, I apologize. Okay. So the 12 zodiac signs comes later. It becomes like a merger, and that comes later. And then that also was, so let's talk about kind of like the root of astrology, because the root of astrology comes from the ancient indigenous people and following the constellations, specifically the Pleiades, Orion, and Sirius, otherwise known as the Great Mothers, the Seven Sisters for the Pleiades, the Hathors. Notice how the Taurus bull is often blue, is typically depicted blue, like the Pleiades. Okay. Then we have Orion, which is now named Orion, but has had other names and has been in different constellations. And then we have Sirius, which has also had other names, predominantly female names. Most of these stars, besides Aldebaran or Aldebaran, or something close to that, which is the reddish star in between the Pleiades and Orion's is it all right? Yeah. Orion's club / arrow, depending on which story you see. And then there's a whole nother star that's also, it's almost as bright as Sirius. Anyhow, so when I started to see that all those stories linked, I was like, no, the Babylonians had a different thing, and that's true. So they had 18 constellations. So we're going to talk about that. And those were lunar-based zodiacs. And then here was me. Oh, did you say 18? Oh, what does that break down to? 9. I'm telling you, there's something in my 9-day calendars. I'm telling you. I know it. I know it in my gut, in my soul. Okay. So, that's like the dual. 18 is like the dual, right? You get all the phases. Okay, so I asked, what are the 18 names? And they are... Okay, so the 18 constellations of the Babylonian moon path, Mul Apen. And there are the Mul Apen tablets, which are said to date back around 1000 BCE. Okay, I'm going to digress a little bit. The information that they say was burned in any of these fires, no. Sure, the information that was already available to the public was burned. But any really, really, really important information, they kept for themselves. And then the burning was like, hey, because I don't know if I had this discussion, but I found out that there is a $30 million book. Did I already talk about this? If so, I'm going to talk about it again. Because this is how we know the information's out there, but it's not for us. So along with like everything else we're being taught, what is that about? What's that about? We're not being taught what is worth $30 million or even $5,000 or even $500. And most college books, college alone costs money. And then come to find out who's publishing these books, who's actually making money off of teaching students, young minds. And those books, one book is at least $100, unless it's been used or it's a second edition and the teacher can still use it for the classes. But books are expensive. This is why libraries are so important. And then even still, a library should be open to everybody, not just to certain people. That's ridiculous. Or you have to pay even exorbitant amount of money just to get into the library. You know, I mean, if we can't see how we've been bamboozled around education and what is taught to us, this is why it's so important for us to remember. Yes, books are important because they do have knowledge in them and oftentimes bring affirmation. But I also know, and you also know, and most people also know, that there are very, very, very educational books out there that will never be seen by the general population. And that is the epitome of gatekeeping. It will always keep people separated. And it will always give those who have the information the ability to trickle down the information. And this is where I feel like this is why all this stuff. Because why, if we were limited from our original DNA, why do all that stuff? Why keep all that information from us? Why all the stuff, literally all the stuff? There's so much stuff that is literally programming constantly happening, trying to keep us from remembering who we are, trying to keep us from remembering the Great Mother, and our elements, which I will get back into what I was talking about. So thanks for listening to that rant. Now, the Babylonian moon path. So it starts with, so I'm going to link it to, because we are indoctrinated in the modern astrology, I'm going to share with you the link between these names because that's what they do, so that we have a general idea of what constellations were happening for the Babylonians with the 18 constellations and the moon cycle. So they had 18 months or 18 cycles, so to speak. Okay, so the Guana, the hired man, that would be Aries. The hired man, I wonder if that's like uplifted man or actually hired, like paid for, hired. Mole, the bull of heaven, Taurus. Sibziana, the faithful shepherd of heaven, that's Orion. Shujin, or Shugin, the old man, that's Perseus, Arigua region. Okay. 5 is the Sikmatar, Gam. The Babylonian name is Gam, and that's the Sikmatar, Gemini area. And then Mastabagalgal, the great twins, Gemini. Alulu, the crab, Cancer. Urgula, the lion, Leo. Absin, the furrow, Virgo, linked to agriculture and fertility. Zibanu, the scales, Libra. Gertab, the scorpion, the Scorpio. Palbilsag, the archer. So these are all star constellations. Just a reminder. Okay. Sagittarius, the archer. Suhermashu, the goatfish, Capricorn. Gula, the great one, Aquarius, also a healing goddess. Gula, the great one, Aquarius. Kun Aldu, the swallow, the Pisces area. So it's a bird instead of a fish. Okay, that's interesting. Anu Intum, the Lady of Heaven, Pisces, Andromeda. Sima, the fishes, part of Pisces. Liam, the stag, possibly Cetus Aries area or a seasonal symbol. So we get into that. So Anu Nitum and Gula are goddesses. So you know how we talk about Anu, right? As far as like when it comes to the ancients or Anubis. Anutium is the name of a goddess from the stars. And Gula, okay? And these were constellations. So again, star stories, okay? Then Sibziana is another name for Orion, which tells us that the moon was not just tracked against the zodiac belt, but through powerful seasonal and ritual constellations. We're going to get to seasonal because I feel like, I don't know, I feel like if you know this, but it's not, I didn't put it together, and so I'm going to share it with you guys. But anyways, and then Capricorn, the goatfish, which goes back to Enki, is the story, right? The god of the waters of creation. And we know that Enki got that from Tiamat. And we're going to get into Tiamat in a second. And that is even, it's just so exciting. Okay. And then Zibanu, which is Libra, didn't even exist in the earlier Sumerian system. It was part of Scorpio's claws originally, and then was added later to the 12th month. So you can see where the 12th month came from. Okay, so this then had me say, okay, well, two things. What other planets are linked to some of these signs? Okay, and a few things. Good gracious. Okay, wait. The signs. Gosh darn it. Hold on. Where the 12 months, like who put the 12 months in? Like who decided, where did that come from? And then the Gregorian calendar. Like the Gregorian calendar is what matches the 12-month thing. Right? Okay. So from here, that's what I did. I started looking up, gosh, I hope I remember all this stuff. I started looking up all the signs that we know today. And did you know that 6 of the 12 signs have a lot of Sagittarius influence in them? I'm not Sagittarius. Saturn influence. So you know how I started with the story of Saturn and the moon, from the Dogons. Once again, I just want to say, still, no one talks about like the Dogons and the Pleiades, because all the other things that we're informed about are equally as important, according to my research, to the Dogon people, the Pleiades. And we keep hearing all these other stories. What am I looking for? I did put it on here, didn't I? No, I think it's in there. Okay, and there's only a few signs because, okay. Oh, and then what is tropical astrology? That's the one. So let's talk about that real quick before I go into each planet. So Ptolemy the something. It's not the first Ptolemy. Is the one who basically solidified all the names and solidified what we now call modern day astrology. And in that, he coined tropical astrology. So I was like, well, what does that actually mean? So tropical actually means seasonal. Means seasonal. So at the equinox and at the equinoxes and at the solstices, it's supposed to be 0, 0. So 0 Cancer at summer equinox. 0 Capricorn at winter solstice. Now here's the thing. Because people have been following the stars for thousands of years, we are able to literally clock the precession of the equinoxes, meaning the giant tilt of the planet. There's this giant tilt that happens that the planet goes through every so many thousands of years. And this is in some of these stories from the stars. And that's how we know about, quote unquote, these dates. Or not these dates, but these longitudes and latitudes. But this was Ptolemy, and this is like 2,000 years ago or longer. We don't know. It could have been 100 years ago. We don't know. A couple hundred years ago. We don't know. Because, again, birthdays and astrology and this knowledge was only given to people who could afford it, literally. Because people were just being born in houses and sometimes not given names for days. No one was actually specifically writing down exactly what time they were. And those who were didn't take it to a hospital or to a clergy or something like that to have it documented. And then somebody read those numbers and read those stars and come up with this elaborate lifestyle for them, unless they could afford it. You know, astrology became a commodity. Okay, so tropical astrology is not based on stars. It comes from stars based on the precession of the equinox, but it doesn't follow the precession of the equinox. It was just based, and it's based in seasons, not stars. So tropical astrology is literally based on seasons. The equinoxes, the equinoxes and the solstices, which are not ours originally. They are, but not in the way that we've been taught. And I also learned, so, for example, the Southern Cross, so there's a stars constellation, and it's called the Crux. We call it the Southern Cross, but it's called the Crux. So the Crux is only seen, not only seen, but mostly only seen, or predominantly seen, below the equator in the southern hemisphere. But some parts just above the equator can see it. But there are parts of the world like Egypt who used to be able to see. Now, Egypt had Upper and Lower Egypt, and Upper Egypt was lower and Lower Egypt was, you know, it's the opposite of what they told us, which is a whole another thing. Because was that based on stars instead of like north, south, east, and west, right? Anyhow, North Egypt, where the pyramids are, wouldn't be able to see the Southern Crux now. But they would have been able to see it before. And there is a dark star constellation seemingly above it that has been called the womb of the world. So the Ankh could have been based, not could have been, most likely is based off of the stars, but maybe not the stars that we're told are there now, which is a whole nother part of why they keep us distracted from looking at it. Because if we realized how much we actually study the stars, and all cultures study the stars, we would understand these stories much better. They would become more clear. And if you have Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, which make up what we now call the Big Dipper, which is why I'm going to constantly refer it to the Ursa Major and Minor first, because that is not colonialized. That is indigenous. That is one of the many beings that were given the stories of those stars, because those stars stay in one spot and move in one, they just change direction, but they don't set or rise like Orion, Ceres, and the Pleiades. And the Southern Crux does something similar. Wait. The Southern Crux does set and rise. And they have a system there that also is like our Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the Northern Hemisphere. The Southern Hemisphere also has one of those. It may be the crux, but I'm not going to say that for sure. And also in the American Indian, the Indigenous American stories, there's a story of the Fisher. And I've shared a little bit of this in my memberships, but I go into more of the dark star constellation in the memberships because, oh my gosh, it's absolutely fascinating. It's literally fascinating because these are things we're not taught. These are the things we're not asking. Just like all the other information, why would we be so dead set on believing this given to us astrology? Okay, so with that part said about that part, I'm going to go into, okay, so the planets are obviously an influence because we still have names of the week after that. We have names of the months named after some planets and these energies, but also, are there other planets that influence each one of these? There must be, because other planets exist. So also when we say what is the ruling planet, doesn't that give us information as to what the characteristics of that person is going to be based on the energies of that planet? Then we're going to talk about Mercury and then something else, hopefully if I remember it. So here's what helps, okay? So air, and then also elements. That's the other thing, okay? So Aries, our system starts with fire. Now let's just clarify. Everything comes from water originally. Like everything comes from the feminine, either plasma or water, but some sort of liquid-ish beginnings. We see that today. We see that today with many things being created. It is with darkness and with water, okay? So why are we starting with fire, which is one of the last elements supposedly to show up? I don't completely believe that because of volcanoes and lightning and stuff like that. But anyhow, first we start with Aries, just because that's how our system is. The, astrology we've been given today. So we start with Aries. Mars is their ruling planet, but also the Sun and Saturn are highly involved with Aries. Taurus, Venus, and then the moon and Earth, the actual Earth, right? And Taurus is an Earth sign. And then Gemini, predominantly Mercury. But Uranus can also influence Gemini. But specifically right now, we're being told that Uranus is going through the constellation of Gemini. Okay. And that can mean different shifts. So if we do look at the energies of the planets, that makes sense. So like if Uranus and Mercury are coming close together, yeah, I could see some major changes happening, some weird alchemistry happening, and endings of certain things, beginnings of other things. And then if there's a retrograde happening, which means that Mercury appears to spin backwards, Also, it's Mercury, so even when it's going forwards, it can appear to spin backwards, which is why the whole lag, because Mercury itself is an element. Mercury is not only a planet, it's an element. So there's so much going on there, and it's one of those elements that always comes back to itself. So it's a very collective element, so to speak. So you include that with somebody who is born with that planet in their influence, that makes sense. And especially if you include Uranus, because we don't have a day of the week named after Uranus. Okay. Now, Cancer, Moon, but also Jupiter and Pluto, which would make sense, right? Especially like how Jupiter's the king of the waters, and then Pluto is depths. Did you see that again? Did you see that? What is it? Who is it? Okay, and then, the depths with Cancer, the darkness, the depths, the ancientness, okay? And then Cancer used to be called something else, which, I find it interesting. Anyhow, okay, Leo, and Leo is ruled by the sun, which is not a planet. But, okay, so that's why I was like, wait, same with Cancer, like Moon, that's not a planet. What else is it ruled by, right? So, Leo is also ruled, Leo has a lot of influences. Mars, Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, and it is a co-ruler. A co-ruler is Pluto for a Leo. Which with all of that makes so much sense. And then you could see how like the Aries and the Leo might have some very similar energies. But then when you throw in Pluto and Jupiter with the Leo, you could see where business is different, where depth and also sensitivity can show up. Because sometimes the Aries is less gentle and the Leo can be more gentle. And you can also relate that to the matriarchal side of like the motherly lion, right? But that's the animalism. I'm just mostly bringing in the planetary energy. Okay, and then Virgo would be next. Oh, and Leo is fire. Virgo is earth, also predominantly Mercury, but has Chiron as a major influence in its sign, which is a star. Or is it also a planet? And so that's the wounded healer. This is why Virgos have a perfectionism side of them. But they also kind of like their independence and their solitude, where sometimes Geminis can have trouble with silence and solitude. Okay? And Virgo is an earth sign, while Gemini is an air sign. We're going to get back into that before we go. Another fairly long video. Thanks for listening. Okay, Libra. Venus is their ruling planet, and Libra is an air sign, and Saturn. I did not know that, but it makes sense, especially with the way Libras can be like, in the nicest way, F off. Right? Like Libras, Virgos can be very similar, but Libras do it in a way that you're almost like, did they just tell me to F off? And can be very organized, very boundary setting. That makes sense, okay? And then Scorpio, its ruling planets are Mars and Pluto. So you're looking at depth and some very people always associate Mars with war because that story was given to Mars, but Mars is a mother first. Okay, so that's all I gotta say. Okay. And also Scorpio is influenced by the sun, the moon, Mercury, and Venus. literally secondary influencers. So Scorpio has 6 planets influencing it. And Leo has, well, I said 6 planets. 4 planets and 2 celestial objects. And Leo also has 5 planets and 1 celestial influence. This is why when you like put down when you were your birthday, that doesn't matter. This is, somebody came up with it. Someone created it. It's all about your planet. It's really all about your planets, and it is about the stars and what stories go with those stars. And it's I'm starting to see like what's that called? I think this is all important to knowing who you are, but I'm also realizing it's somebody else telling us who we are in accordance to their system. I don't want that. That's patriarchy. That is not freedom. That is telling me something about my ancestors that is absolutely not true. Period. You're telling me we did this, we didn't do this. I didn't do this in my lifetimes. Maybe later on I did. This is probably why I was attracted to it in the first place. But I like witchy stuff. I like magic stuff. I like knowledge stuff. Especially knowledge that is seemingly taboo. But I'm also realizing that's part of patriarchy. Like, oh, it's taboo and it's scary. Where a lot of things come from the mothers, and it usually stems from some kind of medicine or communal project like the stars. Because we followed the stars and we knew when to plant. And when to have ceremony. And when to move. And when there was going to be a flood. And when it was going to get really hot. I mean. Okay, so we're moving on to Jupiter. Sagittarius. Which is a fire sign. So we have Jupiter, which is why I said that. Secondary is Saturn. And then Sagittarius is linked to the North Node and South Node stars, which means it changes with the precession of the equinox. Because the stars stay fixed. That's kind of what the stars, they pretty much stay the same. So when we can't see them anymore, the earth has shifted. I personally, through all of this, theorize that the great mothers and sea stars and humans, but specifically sea stars, have a connection and a knowing to the stars, to the moon, to the planet in a way that we literally move it. We move it. We move the stars. We move the moon. We move the planets. We move the waters. We move the earth. We move the air. Which, this is going to be a long video, but I'll have that. And then I'll re-listen and see what parts I might have missed, and maybe it'll be a part 2. Okay. So then Capricorn. Saturn, Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and an Earth sign. That's 6 planets. Capricorn. Like, no wonder. But this has made me think of every Capricorn I've ever known, and I was like, okay, that makes sense to me. Are you kidding me? They're typically good in business. They're loyal. They also can be brass, but almost like in a logical way. Mysterious. Love nature. Can be very deep, but also somewhat surface. I mean, wow. And then when you see like the cornucopia, like, of course, that makes sense. That makes sense when you have all these planets. Absolutely. Okay, and then Aquarius, Uranus, and Saturn. Also with influences of Mercury and Pluto. Okay. And this is an air sign. with Uranus and Saturn. It also totally makes sense to me. I was like, somebody knew this. So when they're printing out your chart, they're like, oh yeah, these planets are involved. This person has this and this. And so we go along with the houses, but the houses are based around seasons. And then those seasons, we look up at the stars and we see what's going on. But really what we should be doing is looking at the stars and then relating it. Because that's what we used to do. Relating it to us and the earth and what's happening and how we could measure the cycles. I mean, we say time, but really we were measuring the cycles, which is now called time. Okay. And then Pisces, water sign, Neptune, Jupiter, and Saturn. So I was like, okay, that also makes sense with the Saturn. Look how it's Saturn, Aquarius Saturn, Capricorn Saturn, Sagittarius Saturn. I mean, in Sagittarius, now that kind of makes sense. And some of these signs were then assigned these planets, but originally, most of these original rulers were Saturn. I believe with Leo, Saturn was the original ruler, and possibly Aries. But I'm almost positive with Leo. And I think also Scorpio, the original planet. And that's the thing, like we didn't individualize it this much. So then I realized, because Mercury. Oh, and so because the precession of the equinox, somebody who does think they're a Gemini is actually a Taurus. Because we're basing it off of the calculations of Ptolemy over 2,000 years ago. And 0 Capricorn isn't even where the equinox happens anymore. It's completely, it's in a different constellation. Okay? So, I was like, well, if water is everything, then how come these don't start with water? And where's the fifth element? Why has the fifth element been removed from our knowledge? Why has the fifth element been removed from our star knowledge? Why haven't we been asking that? Because, no. When you think about something like Mercury, the actual substance, which is also called quicksilver, isn't it kind of like ether? It's kind of misunderstood. It does things, people are still trying to figure it out. But one thing it always is like come back to itself. You can't really separate Mercury. Mercury doesn't like to be separated. It likes to be all together. And we are now learning about these giant machines. Did they influence ether? Is this where ether is created? Do we create ether? We create ether in our own body. We are walking ether. All the minerals, all the gases, everything within us is like ether. And then we have people like Tesla, and we have internet. Where do we think that's coming from? Does anyone ever wonder that? Like the internet, this Wi-Fi, this magical connecting energy that no one can see, but you put a tower up and it connects to everything, and that is ether. That is a form of ether that we're not taught about, so we don't even question it. But also, if you're going to have signs and assign elements, you're going to leave out ether. You know what I heard? So ether is the great mother. Tiamat is known as the great ether, the creation of everything. And then certain dark spots in the sky or in the night sky, those are considered like creation spots where ether might be born or rest or hide. Aether, wouldn't it, so the saying I heard several years ago when it was kind of popular was like 9 aether beings. Well, 9 already is in there, right? And then ether. And yes, there is a link to melanin and receptors, but everything has melanin. And we must remember that albinos originate from the melanin. You see what I'm saying? It's not, everything is from the Great Mother. There's no, I feel like it's so obvious now. Again, with the beauty mark, freckles, you see what I'm saying? Like, that's like Great Mother being like, I'm still here. You may not see me in the way that I originate, which looks more like her right here, with it looks like her eyes are glowing. It's so cool. But it all is Mother. All right. So if you remove Aether, you remove the teachings of Aether, you remove Mother, you remove the truth of the unexplainable, you say it's not science, and then you give us elements assigned through a sign, through a birth chart you gave us based on your laws. And literally the tropical astrology sets people in a certain way. And so then even sidereal is still based off of an older calendar. And it's still based off of 12 months. And it's still mostly based off the sun. So it's like the sun and the moon. It's not the stars. Again, and it's so weird to me because I've been saying, like, we wouldn't even know astrology if it wasn't for the stars. Not really understanding what I was actually saying. Because modern astrology is based on seasons. And this 12-housed circular model that fits in a Gregorian calendar. That's the part, right? It's like kind of a bummer to figure this stuff out, because astrology does, it kind of makes it's fun, it's kind of simple. You could be like, hey, this is me. Well, sure. I like the part including the planets, but I'm not just this one sign. That's something also the Great Mothers didn't do. They weren't like, this sign sets in this category, and this is no wonder why you're like that. And this is why we run into people where they'll be like, I'm a Cancer, and they're super outgoing, and they're very kind of like intuitive and influential. Well, one, they're a water sign, so they're going to be connected, supposedly. We're being told they're a water sign. So they're going to be connected and aware of certain emotions. And they have the moon, right, influence. So the phases of the moon will also link with that particular. And I think phases of the moon do also matter with how we were born, because that's how we would understand when we were born most of the time. But sometimes you can always see the moon or the stars. You know what I mean? It's like we're giving so much credit to something. I did. I was so excited about it. I was like so proud to be a certain sign too. Like so proud. Like, I think they're the best signs. And then the more I learned about signs, and then I started really thinking about like when you're in the womb and how the planets are doing their thing while you're in the womb, does that affect you as well? While you're developing? It must. Well, if it's affecting the mother while you're in the womb, is it affecting you in the same way? Is it affecting you in a different way? But it might be affecting you or your body or your emotions, and especially the worlds, if that's the case, especially if they are or not giving it a certain attention. And then what about aether? What about ether? What about that element? Who gets that element? Nobody? It's not cool. Right? So, that's a lot of that. And, okay, I think there was something else I wanted to bring up. Okay, so, yeah, I think that's pretty good for now. I do have information for the next part of my series around the dark star constellations, and these link. So I'd already done a video a couple years back on Mama Cocha, because I had taken a walk and I had heard the cues. And I mean, now it all, like, going back, I'm like, wow, because there's a lot of cues and like the quecha, and, or I might be mispronouncing that, and I apologize. Cocha, I think it's Cocha peoples, and the spellings of a lot of these names, and I'm thinking, wow, was that a hint back then? Anyhow, I had looked her up, but then also I have the cards, Great Mothers and Goddesses, and I had pulled that card again, and I was like, okay, well, this links to the Mama Cocha, which I also talked about, and the dark star constellations around that. But I go into Mama Cocha, her link to certain places and deities, and the link to dark star constellations and star constellations, the ones we can see. I'll be doing that. And then I wanted to kind of update everyone as to the next shift I'd like to be doing. And I will be mostly doing this on my Patreon. So those who are already my Patreon members and subscribers, I will be offering this to you because you already are a supporter. And I want to offer it to those who don't know about it. If you become a Patreon supporter, you get a little bit more information around this. But recently I have finished schooling to put me in a position where I feel comfortable and backed to share with you nutrition and emotion coaching, where we talk about the basics of nutrition, kind of like what is true and what has been kind of pressured onto us or dictated to us. Talk about the digestive system, specifically the large intestine, and ways to show that there is a link between our intestines and our emotions, our food and our emotions, and then ways to kind of work through that, through whether it's recognizing, setting boundaries, or creating new ways of action, and or subtle, quiet self-contemplation and diet and awareness around emotions. So check that out because I think this is kind of the root of everything, between food and stress, and then a lack of support around certain emotions, whether it's from childhood trauma, from our own kind of sabotage, so to speak, choices, through relationships, through either subtle or big T traumas. And when we're functioning in a life of pain, and then we're eating in a hurry, or we're eating in ways that might satisfy, that's a whole nother thing. All of this is like so much mind. And then you get into the nervous system and to the lymph system, and how all of it is connected to the emotions, your overall well-being, certain things that you can take or eliminate from your lifestyle or diet that can help improve so many things. And it's not shared with you because it's not patentable. Okay, so I want to offer that as a trial service for my Patreons and offer it to people who are interested in joining Patreon, and talk about that a little bit more. Okay, and then again, for the members here on YouTube, I will be going more into Mama Cocha and sharing some other stuff with you there. It's pretty fun stuff. Okay, so again, I will rewatch this. If I miss something, I will create a part 2. All right, until next time. Oh yeah, let's do a little music before we go. Also on my Patreon, I just did a singing bowl only session, about a little over 14 minutes, just to help with either relaxation in the morning, relaxation in the evening. If you are a meditator, it's nice natural sound to meditate with, and or background sound from the house. When you're waking up. Okay, I'll be quiet. Just play the music. Till next time, take care.